Marcus Chun pressed his back against the cold metal wall of the abandoned space station. His pulse rifle hummed softly in his hands, its energy cells nearly drained after 3 days of running battles. The Terran Federation had sent his squad to investigate reports of pirate activity in the Outer Rim, but what they found was far worse than simple raiders. The Kythera Collective had established a research facility here, conducting experiments that violated every galactic treaty ever signed. When Marcus and his team arrived, they discovered the pirates were just mercenaries hired to transport test subjects. The real horror lay deeper in the station, where alien scientists performed twisted experiments on captured beings from across the galaxy. Now only Marcus remained alive from his 8-person squad. The others had fallen defending the research labs, while civilians escaped in the emergency pods. He should have left with them, but something kept him here. Deep in the station's core, his scanner detected one remaining life sign. Someone was still trapped in the maximum security wing. Marcus checked his ammunition counter and grimaced. 12 shots left, maybe enough for one final push. The corridors ahead were dark, emergency lighting casting eerie red shadows on the walls. His boots made soft thuds against the deck plating as he moved forward, rifle raised and ready. The Kythera had abandoned the station hours ago, taking their research data with them. They left behind only their automated defense systems and whatever test subjects they deemed worthless. Marcus had already disabled most of the security grid, but the deeper levels remained active. Motion sensors tracked his movement, while hidden weapons systems waited for clear shots. He reached a sealed blast door marked with alien symbols he couldn't read. His universal translator had been damaged in the fighting, leaving him to guess at meanings. The door's control panel glowed with soft blue light, its touch interface responding only to Kythera biology. Marcus pulled out a plasma charge from his utility belt, one of his last explosives. The blast echoed through empty corridors, sending vibrations through the deck beneath his feet. When the smoke cleared, the door hung twisted and broken on its hinges. Beyond lay a long hallway lined with containment cells, each one sealed behind thick transparent aluminum. Most cells stood empty, their occupants long since removed or dead. But at the far end, one cell still glowed with active containment fields. Marcus approached carefully, his rifle trained on the shadows beyond the barrier. What he saw inside made him stop in surprise. A young woman sat chained to the cell's back wall, her head hanging forward as if unconscious. She appeared human at first glance, with pale skin and dark hair that fell across her face. But something felt wrong about her stillness, the way she breathed so slowly it was barely visible. Her clothes were torn and stained with what looked like dried blood. Marcus examined the cell's control system, another Kythera interface he couldn't operate normally. He placed another plasma charge against the power coupling, hoping the explosion wouldn't harm whoever was inside. The containment field flickered and died as the charge detonated, leaving only metal bars between him and the prisoner. He used his rifles, but to break the lock mechanism, metal fragments scattering across the floor. The woman raised her head as he entered, and Marcus saw her eyes for the first time. They were deep red, like fresh blood, and seemed to glow with their own inner light. "Stay back," she whispered, her voice carrying an accent he didn't recognize. "You don't understand what I am." Marcus lowered his rifle slightly, but kept it ready. "I'm Sergeant Marcus Chen, Terran Federación Marines. I'm here to get you out." She laughed bitterly, a sound that echoed strangely in the small cell. "Your Federation sent one man to rescue prisoners? How noble. How foolish. My squad evacuated the other survivors," Marcus explained. "I stayed behind because my scanner showed one more life sign." "That's you." The woman studied his face with those unsettling red eyes. "Life sign," she repeated softly. "Yes, I suppose I do still count as alive, technically speaking." Marcus holstered his rifle and pulled out his plasma cutter, a tool designed for breaching ship hulls. The chains holding her were thick metal, probably reinforced against energy weapons. "Hold still. These chains look tough, but I can cut through them." "Don't," she said sharply. Those aren't ordinary restraints. They're specifically designed to contain my kind. If you remove them without proper preparation, the results could be unfortunate for both of us. Your kind. Marcus paused with the cutter in his hand. What are you talking about? The woman sighed and lifted her head fully, meeting his gaze. In the dim light, he could see that her canine teeth were longer and sharper than normal human teeth. I am Princess Lyrelii of House Drackle, last daughter of the Sanguis Empire. Your people would call me a vampire. Marcus stared at her for several seconds, processing this information. He had heard stories about vampires during his xenobiology training, ancient legends from old Earth that somehow turned out to be based on real alien species. The Sanguis were supposed to be myth, creatures from human folklore that predated space travel. That's impossible, he said finally. Vampires are just stories. Old Earth legends. Lyrelii smiled sadly, revealing those sharp fangs more clearly. Your ancestors knew us well before they reached the stars. We lived among humans for thousands of years, hiding in plain sight. When humanity developed spaceflight, some of us left Earth to establish colonies among the outer worlds. We built an empire spanning dozens of systems before the Kythera found us. She gestured weakly at the cell around them. They've been hunting my people for decades, studying our biology, trying to understand our unique dietary requirements. I've been their prisoner for 8 months, subjected to tests I wouldn't describe to my worst enemy. Marcus looked at the dry blood on her clothes and the pale, almost translucent quality of her skin. How long since you last fed? 43 days, Lyrelii said quietly. Vampires can survive longer without blood than humans can survive without food, but there are limits. Ima praking mine. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. She was dying slowly, starving in a way no human could understand. The Kythera had kept her alive specifically to study how vampires responded to extreme hunger. It was torture disguised as research. Those chains, he said, looking at her restraints again. What happens if I cut them? Hunger makes us unstable, Lyrelii admitted. These chains suppress our physical abilities. Without them, a starving vampire becomes extremely dangerous. We lose control, become driven only by the need to feed. I could kill you before either of us realized what was happening. Marcus considered his options. He could leave her here and report her location to Federation authorities, but that would take days or weeks. She might not survive that long. He could try to find another solution, but his supplies were limited and the Kythera might return at any moment. Or he could take a risk that might save them both. What if you fed? He asked carefully. Would that restore your self-control? Lyrelii's red eyes widened in surprise. You would offer that? Knowing what I am. You're a prisoner who needs help, Marcus said simply. That's all that matters to me. She shook her head slowly. Human blood is potent for my kind. Very few humans can survive the feeding process. And even if you survived, the blood bond it creates would be permanent. You would never be truly free of me again. Marcus thought about his fallen squad mates, the civilians they had saved, the duty that brought him to this place. He had sworn an oath to protect innocent life wherever he found it. This woman, vampire or not, was innocent. She was a victim of the same monsters who had killed his friends. How much blood would you need? He asked. Not much, Lyrelii said softly. A few milliliters would be enough to restore basic function. But the bond? Worry about that later, Marcus interrupted. He pulled out his combat knife and examined the blade. Tell me what to do. Lyrelii stared at him for a long moment, something like wonder crossing her pale features. You would risk everything for someone you just met? Someone who isn't even human. Where I come from, we judge people by their actions, not their species, Marcus replied. You warn me about the dangers instead of trying to trick me. That tells me what kind of person you are. Tears formed in Lyrelii's red eyes, the first emotion he had seen from her beyond pain and resignation. No one has shown me such kindness in a very long time. Marcus rolled up his sleeve and positioned the knife against his forearm. Just tell me what to do. A small cut will suffice, Lyrelii said quietly. Hold your arm near my mouth, and I'll do the rest. But Marcus, She used his name for the first time, her voice carrying new warmth. Once this happens, our lives will be connected in ways neither of us fully understands. Are you certain this is what you want? Marcus looked at her face, seeing past the pale skin and red eyes to the intelligence and compassion beneath. This was someone worth saving, someone worth the risk. He had made harder choices in combat with less information. I'm certain, he said, and drew the blade across his skin. The cut was shallow but clean, blood welling up immediately in the low gravity. Marcus extended his arm toward Lyralii, who leaned forward as much as her chains allowed. Her lips touched his skin with surprising gentleness, and he felt a strange tingling sensation where she made contact. The feeding lasted only seconds, but Marcus felt the effects immediately. A warmth spread through his arm and into his chest, carrying with it an odd sense of connection. He could feel Lyralii's presence in his mind, not reading his thoughts, but simply there, like a second heartbeat matching his own. When she pulled away, her skin had already begun to regain normal color. Her eyes, while still red, now held genuine warmth instead of desperate hunger. Most dramatically, the wounds and bruises covering her body started to heal visibly as he watched. Remarkable, she breathed, flexing her fingers as strength returned to her limbs. Human blood truly is extraordinary. I feel more restored than I have in months. Marcus examined his arm and found that his own cut had already stopped bleeding, sealed by whatever process had occurred during the feeding. Is that normal? Nothing about this is normal, Lyralii replied with a small smile. Human-vampire blood bonds are incredibly rare. Most humans don't survive the process, and those who do usually bond with vampires of their own, choosing under controlled circumstances. What we just shared was unique. She tested her restraints and found that her restored strength made little difference against the specialized chains. I still can't break free on my own. The Kithira designed these restraints specifically for vampire physiology. Marcus raised his plasma cutter again. But now you can control yourself if I cut them. Yes, Lyralii confirmed. Though there are other complications we should discuss, such as the blood bond creates certain obligations, she said carefully. By saving my life in this manner, you've placed yourself under my protection according to vampire law. I am now responsible for your welfare, and I cannot allow you to come to harm. Marcus paused in his cutting preparation. What does that mean exactly? It means, dear Marcus, that I cannot permit you to leave my side until I'm certain you're safe, Lyralii explained with a rueful smile. The bond compels me to guard your life with my own. Even if you wanted to abandon me, I would be honor-bound to follow and protect you. The implications slowly sank in as Marcus considered their situation. So you're saying that by saving you, I've essentially gained a vampire bodyguard for life. That's one way to put it, Lyralii agreed, though I prefer to think of it as gaining a very grateful and very powerful ally. Marcus activated his plasma cutter and began working on the first chain. Sparks flew as the high-energy beam cut through metal designed to hold beings with superhuman strength. Well, I've had worse outcomes from rescue missions. As the chains fell away one by one, Lyralii stretched muscles that hadn't moved freely in months. Her movements were graceful and precise, carrying a predatory elegance that reminded Marcus she was no longer entirely human. But when she looked at him, her expression held only warmth and gratitude. You realize, she said as he cut the final chain, that this bond works both ways. I can sense your emotional state, your general health, even your location if we're separated. And you'll develop similar abilities regarding me. Marcus helped her stand, noting that she moved with perfect balance despite her recent weakness. Is that going to be a problem? That depends, Lyralii replied with a mischievous glint in her red eyes, on how much privacy you require in your thoughts. Before Marcus could respond to that unsettling prospect, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red as automated systems detected intruders in the restricted sections. Either the Kithira had returned, or something else had triggered the security protocols. Time to go, Marcus said, checking his rifle's power levels. Can you fight? Lyralii smiled. And, for the first time, Marcus saw the predator lurking beneath her civilized exterior. Her fangs gleamed in the emergency lighting as she tested her newly restored strength. Oh yes, she purred. I can fight very well indeed. The station's corridors echoed with the sound of heavy footsteps and mechanical whirring. Marcus peered around a corner and saw 3 Kythera soldiers advancing in formation, their insectoid forms moving with unnatural coordination. Each one carried plasma weapons that could punch through standard marine armor with ease. Kythera combat units, Marcus whispered to Lyralii, who crouched beside him in the shadows. They must have detected the security breach when I freed you. Lyralii studied the approaching enemies with predatory interest. Her enhanced senses could pick up details Marcus missed, like the electromagnetic signatures of their weapons and the specific pheromones each soldier carried. 3 units, standard patrol configuration. Their armor has weak points at the joint connections. You can see that from here? Marcus asked, impressed despite their dangerous situation. Vampire vision is considerably sharper than human sight, Lyralii explained softly. I can also hear their heartbeats if they have hearts. These creatures seem to have a different cardiovascular system entirely. Marcus checked his rifle's ammunition counter again. 11 shots remaining, barely enough for sustained combat against armored opponents. I don't have enough firepower to take all 3. We need another approach. Leave that to me, Lyralii said, her voice carrying a confidence that made Marcus feel both reassured and slightly nervous. Before he could object, she stepped into the corridor directly in front of the advancing Kythera soldiers. Their reaction was immediate, weapons swinging toward her with mechanical precision. But Lyralii moved like liquid shadow, flowing between their firing lines with impossible grace. The first soldier managed to squeeze off 1 shot before Lyralii reached him. Her hand struck his weapon with enough force to crush the barrel, while her other hand found the joint weakness she had identified. Alien armor cracked like an eggshell as her fingers punched through reinforced plating. The second soldier tried to adjust his aim, but Lyralii was already behind him. She grabbed his helmet and twisted with a sharp motion that left the creature motionless on the deck. The third soldier managed to fire twice before Lyralii closed the distance, but her enhanced reflexes allowed her to dodge plasma bolts that would have vaporized a normal human. Marcus watched in amazement as the vampire princess dismantled 3 heavily armed soldiers in less than 30 seconds. Her movements were beautiful and terrifying, combining inhuman speed with centuries of combat experience. When the last Kythera fell, she turned back to Marcus with barely a hair out of place. That was educational, she said calmly, examining her hands for damage. I haven't fought Kythera before. Their biology is quite different from most species. No kidding, Marcus replied, stepping over the fallen soldiers. How are you so calm about this? I've been a warrior for longer than your species has had space flight, Lyralii reminded him. Combat is simply another skill, like diplomacy or mathematics. Though I admit, it feels good to use my abilities for something other than entertainment for sadistic researchers. They continued deeper into the station, following Marcus's scanner toward the docking bays where his ship waited. The corridors were eerily quiet now, emergency lighting casting strange shadows that seemed to move with lives of their own. Lyralii moved beside him with predatory silence, her enhanced senses alert for threats Marcus couldn't detect. Tell me about your empire, Marcus said as they walked. If vampires at space colonies, why haven't we encountered them before? The Sanguis Empire was deliberately isolated, Lyralii explained. We learned early that most species react poorly to our dietary requirements. Rather than risk constant warfare, we established ourselves in remote systems and maintained minimal contact with galactic civilization. She paused in an intersection, listening to sounds Marcus couldn't hear. After determining the path was clear, she continued both the explanation and their journey. We were quite successful for several centuries. Vampire longevity allowed us to plan in timescales other species couldn't match. We built wonders that would have impressed even your Federation. What happened? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The Kythera discovered us about 50 years ago, Lyralii said, her voice growing cold. At first, we thought they were simply another species interested in trade. They seemed fascinated by our technology and offered generous exchanges. We should have been more suspicious of their interest in our biology. They reached another sealed door, this one leading to the station's central hub. Marcus placed a plasma charge while Lyralii kept watch, her red eyes scanning the shadows for movement. The explosion echoed through empty halls as they proceeded into the hub's vast circular chamber. They began kidnapping our people for research, Lyralii continued as they crossed the chamber's zero-gravity section. At first, just a few disappeared from remote colonies. We assumed it was pirates or slavers. By the time we realized the truth, they had already learned too much about our weaknesses. Marcus activated his magnetic boots to walk along the chamber's curved wall, while Lyralii simply pushed off surfaces with perfect precision. Her grace in zero gravity was almost supernatural, as if she belonged in the emptiness of space itself. The Kythera developed weapons specifically designed to harm vampires, she said, her tone growing grim. Electromagnetic fields that disrupt our nervous systems, chemicals that poison our blood, restraints that suppress our physical abilities. They systematically destroyed our colonies, capturing as many of us as possible for experimentation. How many survived? Marcus asked, though he feared the answer. Unknown, Lyralii replied sadly. I've been imprisoned for 8 months with no contact from my people. For all I know, I might be the last. They reached the docking bay access tunnel, a long corridor that led to the external airlocks. Marcus's ship, a modified Federation scout vessel, waited at the far end. But as they approached the final security checkpoint, they discovered they weren't alone. A massive Kythera research unit blocked their path, its 8-limbed form bristling with scientific instruments and defensive weapons. This wasn't a standard soldier, but a specialized creature designed for capturing and studying dangerous specimens. Multiple sensor arrays tracked their movement, while defensive barriers deployed automatically. Research Unit Designation Gamma-7, the creature announced in mechanical tones. Escaped specimen detected. Protocol requires recapture for continued study. Marcus raised his rifle, but he knew it would be useless against the research unit's heavy armor. These creatures were designed to capture beings far more dangerous than a single human marine. Lyralii stepped forward, her posture shifting into something that reminded Marcus of a predator preparing to strike. You will not imprison me again, she said, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. The research unit's sensors focused on her with obvious interest. Specimen shows remarkable recovery rate. Blood source appears to be human male, highly compatible with vampire physiology. Both subjects required for comprehensive analysis. Over my dead body, Marcus muttered, though he knew that might be exactly what was about to happen. Lyralii glanced back at him with a strange smile. That won't be necessary. I believe it's time these creatures learned why vampires were feared across the galaxy. The change that came over her was unlike anything Marcus had witnessed. Her form seemed to grow larger and more imposing, though he realized this was mostly an illusion created by her shifting posture and the way shadows gathered around her. Her red eyes began to glow with inner fire, and when she smiled, her fangs had become noticeably longer and sharper. You want to study vampire biology? She asked the research unit, her voice carrying harmonics that made Marcus's bones vibrate. Allow me to provide a demonstration. What happened next challenged everything Marcus thought he knew about physics and biology. Lyralii moved faster than his eyes could follow, covering the distance to the research unit in what seemed like a single step. Her hand struck the creature's armor with impacts that rang like hammer blows on anvils. The research unit responded with multiple weapon systems, firing energy nets and paralysis darts designed to subdue dangerous specimens. But Lyralii flowed around the attacks like water, her movements defying normal laws of momentum and inertia. She seemed to anticipate each weapon before it fired, dancing between energy beams with impossible grace. Marcus watched in fascination and growing concern as Lyralii systematically destroyed the research unit's defensive systems. Her strength was clearly superhuman, but it was her speed that truly impressed him. She moved like liquid lightning, striking precisely at weak points before the creature could react. But the research unit had been designed specifically to capture vampires. As Lyralii pressed her attack, hidden systems activated throughout the docking bay. Electromagnetic field generators powered up, filling the air with a low humming that made Marcus's teeth ache. The fields are designed to disrupt vampire nervous systems, and their effect on Lyralii was immediate. She stumbled mid-attack, her perfect grace replaced by obvious pain. The research unit took advantage immediately, firing containment foam that expanded to encase her legs and lower torso. More electromagnetic emitters emerged from the walls, increasing the field strength until Lyralii fell to her knees with a cry of anguish. Specimen successfully subdued, the research unit announced with satisfaction. Initiating containment protocols. Marcus felt something burning in his chest, a rage that seemed to come from somewhere outside himself. Through the blood bond, he could feel Lyralii's pain as if it were his own. The electromagnetic fields that were torturing her also sent jolts of sympathetic agony through his nervous system. He raised his rifle and emptied his entire power cell into the nearest field generator, knowing it was probably futile but unable to stand by while she suffered. To his surprise, the damaged generator sparked and died, reducing the field strength enough for Lyralii to move again. The generators, she gasped, understanding his strategy immediately. They need multiple emitters to maintain containment strength. Marcus switched to his sidearm and began targeting the other field generators, while Lyralii fought through her pain to break free of the containment foam. Her movements were still impaired by the remaining electromagnetic fields, but her determination was fierce. The research unit realized its advantage was slipping and deployed its final weapon, a gravity projector designed to pin specimens against solid surfaces. The device created localized gravitational fields that would have crushed a normal human, but Lyralii managed to resist through sheer strength of will. "Marcus," she called out, her voice strained with effort. "The gravity projector has a feedback loop. If you can overload one of its emitters, the whole system will collapse." Marcus spotted the device she meant, a crystalline structure mounted on the research unit's back. It was protected by armor plating, but his plasma charges might be able to penetrate. He pulled out his last explosive and activated the timer, knowing he would have only seconds to get in position. The research unit's attention was focused on maintaining its hold on Lyralii, giving Marcus a chance to approach from behind. He placed the plasma charge against the gravity projector's housing and dove for cover as the timer reached 0. The explosion was spectacular, sending feedback through all the research unit systems. The gravity projector overloaded and died, while the remaining electromagnetic generators sparked and shut down. Suddenly, freed from the fields that had been torturing her, Lyralii rose to her feet with renewed strength. What she did next would have been impossible for any normal being. Moving faster than thought, she reached into the research unit's damaged systems and began tearing out critical components with surgical precision. Her knowledge of alien technology seemed encyclopedic, allowing her to identify exactly which systems to destroy for maximum effect. Within moments, the massive research unit was reduced to scrap metal and sparking electronics. Lyralii stood over its remains, breathing heavily but victorious. When she turned to Marcus, her eyes still glowed with residual power from the battle. "Are you injured?" she asked, her concern obvious through their mental connection. "I'm fine," Marcus replied, though he was shaken by what he had witnessed. "How did you know so much about their technology?" 8 months of imprisonment teaches you many things about your captors, Lyralii said grimly. I made sure to learn everything I could about their methods and equipment. Knowledge is often the only weapon a prisoner possesses. They continued toward Marcus's ship, the corridor now clear of obstacles. But as they walked, Marcus found himself studying his companion with new eyes. The vampire princess was clearly far more dangerous than she had initially appeared. Her combination of physical abilities, centuries of experience, and intimate knowledge of their enemies made her a formidable ally. Lyralii, he said carefully, what exactly am I getting myself into by bonding with you? She looked at him with an expression that was both amused and sympathetic. That, dear Marcus, is a very good question, and I'm afraid the answer is far more complicated than either of us might prefer. They reached Marcus's ship and began the boarding sequence, but both of them knew their adventure was just beginning. The blood bond between them had created obligations and connections that neither fully understood. And somewhere in the galaxy, the Kythera Collective continued their dark research, hunting the remaining survivors of the Sanguis Empire. As Marcus powered up his ship's systems and prepared for departure, he realized that his simple rescue mission had become something much larger and more dangerous. He had saved a vampire princess, but in doing so, he had also inherited her enemies, her responsibilities, and her ancient secrets. The question now was whether a human marine and a vampire royal could survive the challenges ahead, or if their unlikely partnership would destroy them both. Marcus's ship, the Vagrant Star, hummed quietly as it traveled through hyperspace toward the nearest Federation outpost. The modified scout vessel had been his home for 3 years of deep space reconnaissance missions, but it had never carried a passenger like Lyralii before. The vampire princess sat in the co-pilot's chair, studying the navigation displays with obvious fascination. Your technology is remarkably efficient, she observed, her fingers dancing across the control interface with supernatural grace. Federation engineering focuses on practical solutions rather than aesthetic appeal. Very different from Sanguis designs. Marcus glanced at her while monitoring the hyperspace corridor. What were your ships like? Beautiful, Lyralii said simply. We had centuries to perfect our designs, so we prioritized elegance alongside functionality. Vampire vessels were works of art that could cross the galaxy in perfect silence. Many species considered them the most beautiful spacecraft ever created. She paused, her expression growing sad. All destroy now, most likely. The Kythera prefer to eliminate evidence of their crimes. Marcus wanted to offer comfort, but he was still adjusting to the mental connection between them. Through the blood bond, he could sense her emotions like background music in his mind. Her grief was profound, but controlled, tempered by centuries of experience with loss. It was unlike any human emotional pattern he had encountered. Tell me about this blood bond, he said, trying to understand their situation better. You mentioned it creates obligations, but what does that mean practically? Lyralii turned to face him fully, her red eyes studying his expression. The bond varies depending on the individuals involved and the circumstances of its creation. In our case, it was formed through an act of selfless sacrifice, which creates the strongest possible connection. She gestured to the space between them, as if pointing at something invisible. I can sense your general health, your emotional state, and your location within a certain range. You'll develop similar abilities as the bond strengthens. We can also share thoughts and memories if we choose to open that connection. And the obligations? Marcus pressed. I am bound by vampire law to protect your life with my own, Lyralii explained seriously. This isn't simply gratitude or friendship. It's a magical compulsion that I cannot ignore even if I wanted to. Your welfare has become more important to me than my own survival. Marcus considered this information while checking their current position. They were making good time toward the Federation outpost, but something about their situation bothered him. What about my obligations to you? Technically, you have none, Lyralii admitted. The bond was formed when you gave blood to save my life. From a vampire perspective, you could abandon me at any Federation station and walk away without consequence. But Marcus sensed there was more to this explanation. But the bond affects both parties, whether they understand it or not, Lyralii continued. You'll find yourself increasingly protective of me, drawn to ensure my safety and well-being. It's not magical compulsion like what I experience, but it is a genuine psychological effect. Marcus thought about his decision to stay behind and rescue her when he could have escaped with the other survivors. At the time, it had seemed like simple duty, but now he wondered if the connection had been forming even before the blood exchange. There's something else, Lyralii said quietly. The bond grows stronger over time, especially if we remain in close contact. Eventually, separation becomes difficult for both parties. How difficult? Marcus asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. Previous cases suggest that bonded individuals who are separated for extended periods experience severe depression, anxiety, and physical illness, Lyralii explained reluctantly. In extreme cases, prolonged separation can be fatal for both the vampire and their bonded partner. Marcus stared at her in shock. You're saying I can never leave you? I'm saying that leaving me would become increasingly unpleasant for both of us as the bond strengthens, Lyralii corrected. But, Marcus, you should know that I never intended for this to happen. If I had been thinking clearly, I would have warned you more thoroughly about the consequences. Through their mental connection, Marcus could feel her genuine regret and concern for his situation. She truly hadn't meant to trap him, but that didn't change the fact that his life had been fundamentally altered by their encounter. So what happens now? He asked. Do I deliver you to Federation authorities and hope for the best? Lyralii laughed bitterly. Your Federation would likely study me just as thoroughly as the Kythera did, only with better intentions. Vampire physiology is too valuable from a scientific perspective. They would promise me freedom while conducting research that could last decades. The ship's proximity alarms chimed softly, indicating they were approaching their destination. Marcus began the process of dropping out of hyperspace, but his mind was focused on the impossible situation they faced. He had rescued Lyralii from one form of imprisonment only to discover that they were now bound together in ways that might prove equally restrictive. There is another option, Lyralii said carefully, one that would benefit both of us, if you're willing to consider it. Marcus engaged the sublight engines as they entered normal space near the Federation outpost. I'm listening. Help me find other survivors of my people, Lyralii proposed. The Kythera can't have killed all of us. Somewhere in the galaxy, there are vampires in hiding, waiting for a chance to rebuild. With your Federation contacts and my knowledge of Sanguis technology, we could locate them. She leaned forward her chair, her expression intense. In return, I would share vampire resources with humanity. Our longevity, our technology, our unique perspective on galactic affairs. The bond between us could become the foundation for a new alliance between our species. Marcus considered her proposal as he guided the ship toward the Federation outpost's docking bays. It was ambitious and dangerous, requiring him to essentially abandon his military career to pursue a mission that might be impossible. But the alternative was delivering Lyralii to scientists who would view her as a fascinating specimen rather than a person. What about the Federation? He asked. They'll want to debrief me about the Kythera research station. If I disappear with you, they'll assume I've been compromised or corrupted. Then, we need to convince them that our partnership serves Federation interests, Lyralii said simply. Present our mission as an intelligence-gathering operation. The Federation wants to know more about the Kythera Collective and their activities. Who better to help with that than someone who survived 8 months as their prisoner? The outpost traffic control system guided them toward an available docking port, and Marcus began the final landing sequence. Around them, other ships came and went in the routine business of Federation space. Cargo haulers, patrol vessels, civilian transports, all of them representing the normal life that Marcus was considering abandoning. You're asking me to give up everything I know, he said quietly. I'm asking you to help save what remains of my people